This is WXOJLP Northampton, 103.3 FM, your Valley Free radio station. Welcome. I'm Warren O'Deschilette, and this is A Baha'i Perspective. A Baha'i Perspective is a radio program that examines contemporary issues from the perspective of the principles of the Baha'i Faith. If you want information specifically on the Baha'i Faith, you're welcome to visit the website www.baha'i.org. That's BAHAI.org. Or you can call the toll-free number 1-800-22-UNITE. Today I'm playing an interview with Jean and Phyllis Unterschuetz, a Baha'i couple from the Midwest who, after their nest of children was emptied, decided to hit the road in service to communities throughout the U.S., promoting the principles of the Baha'i Faith primarily in the area of race unity. I started the interview by asking Jean how he ran into the Baha'i Faith.
I was pretty confused at that time in my life. I was really looking for some sense of order. And I was dabbling in various philosophies. I think there was a guy named Alan Watts at the time who was very popular. And I was reading a lot of things by him. However, nothing really seemed to have staying power. In other words, it seemed it brought some kind of a rush of what should I say? I guess elation is the only thing I can think. That you found something that finally makes sense out of things, and then you realize that it's just part of everything else. It doesn't really unify the whole big picture, you know. So when I found and how I found the faith is I was doing some substitute teaching in a school system, and after that I had a couple of kind of brainless jobs, just kind of kicking around. And I met a guy, and he invited me to a Baha'i fireside. And I was very impressed right away. I was fairly anti-religious at the time. Didn't really understand what religion was all about. And I just really didn't have a lot of respect for religion. But when I walked into this house, a private house, I was very impressed with just how they were speaking, how they were relating to me. You know, it was way beyond my expectations.
So it knocked down these anti-religious barriers almost immediately, or?
I have to say, I just really felt something very powerful about the experience right from the beginning.
Yeah,
it kind of cut through a lot of concepts that I had about religion.
And how about you, Phyllis? How did you end up running into the Baha'i Faith?
I was a member of the Methodist Church and had a very close relationship with Christ. I'm one of these people that used to cry on Good Friday every year and get all giddy on Easter Sunday. And but as I got into high school, I got had more and more difficulties understanding the things that the church was teaching. And my senior year of high school, I had a teacher who interpreted the Bible very literally, and so a lot of the questions that he answered in a literal way, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. And then when I remember one time he was talking about how only Christians were going to heaven and everybody else was going to hell. And I remember saying, but last week's lesson was God created everybody and God loves everybody, and I don't understand this. And I think I have to find something different. And so I went off to college at that point, thinking that I was going to find a different church that agreed more with what I believed. Because my mother had taught me, and my grandmother both had taught me all my life that everybody was of value and that it wasn't okay to discriminate against people. And it was my father's mother, my grandmother, whose house we lived in, and she also taught me so many spiritual concepts that were a part of me, and I needed a religion that validated the things I already believed. So I went off to college thinking I was looking for a different church, and I did actually go to several different churches. But the reason that I started looking into the Baha'i Faith had really nothing to do with religion originally. The community I grew up in was an all-white community. There were, I think there were 2 African-American families, if I remember correctly. But I had never talked to anybody face-to-face that wasn't white.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got down to college, I went to Illinois Wesleyan University in Bloomington, Illinois, down in the middle of the cornfields. And this was, I guess, the year before had been an all-white campus. And then the year that I got down there, they had probably 30 black students. And these students were very segregated.
Mm-hmm.
They had their own table in the cafeteria, they had their own dorm rooms, and they were just kind of pretty much kept to themselves. But there was one exception, one young man who seemed to function like a magnet. I would watch him. He would walk through the quad, and wherever he walked, he attracted black and white to him. And he would form these interracial groups that would be walking along together. And I just thought, I didn't know how he did that. I had never seen anything like that. And it took me about 3 months to work up my courage to talk to him. Because, as I said, I had never talked before to anybody who was black. And we both worked in the cafeteria together to make money for our tuition. We worked in the dish room, and he was the one that loaded the dishwasher, and I sorted the silverware. And I remember finally one day just screwing up my courage and walking up to him and saying, "Okay, what is it that makes you different?" And he said to me, "I've been watching you watch me, and I've been waiting for you to ask. It's the power of the Baha'i Faith that makes me different." And so then as he started teaching me what Baha'u'llah had taught, I found that it was everything that I already believed in. And I remember saying, "This just makes so much sense to me." So that was when I became a Baha'i. That was in 1968.
Okay. So, Jean, once you became a Baha'i, did it sort of change your direction in any way in life?
Well, for one thing, I immediately developed a respect for the whole concept of religion. I had no idea what religion was about prior to my encounter with Baha'i Faith. I remember sitting in discussion groups, we refer to them as firesides, about their discussion groups about the Baha'i Faith and religion in general. And looking around at the other youth and thinking, what is it what's attracting them to these get-togethers? It's more than just a bunch of youth having fun. They seem like they're attracted to something more than just each other and just fun.
Something deeper.
Something deeper, and they could have fun, but they could also get very serious, and they also could have like several hours long prayer sessions if the need warranted something like that. If there was some issue that somebody was having, and they would gather together in a room off to the side and form a little circle and say prayers for hours and hours. So that was different. It was nothing that I had ever experienced before.
So you were among these youth?
Yeah, I participated in that. I remember I was going to these meetings for about 3 months. And trying to decide for myself, is Baha'u'llah who he claims to be? And I really got to a point where I thought, I have to get out of this environment, this Baha'i environment, to kind of be in a little vacuum or something so I can think clearly. It turns out that my brother was studying abroad at the time in Germany, so I made arrangements to go visit him and spend some time with him. And so while I was over there, he had a break, and we traveled around and stayed in various youth hostels. And everywhere I went, I would ask people, "Do you know about the Baha'i Faith? Have you heard about the Baha'i Faith?" And nobody had. So I would have to tell them whatever I knew, hoping that they would say, "Oh, yes, I guess I did," or maybe somebody else, "I know this guy that knows something about the Baha'i Faith." That somehow I would get some added little evidence that would tip me over, and convince me. And I remember that we were in a youth hostel, and it was time to eat dinner. And I told my brother to go on, that I had to stay behind for a moment. And I just said, I've got to decide, is Baha'u'llah who he claims he is or not? And at that moment, I just said, well, I believe it's true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And from that moment on, that was that.
Mm-hmm. You were committed to the Baha'i Faith.
I was committed, yeah.
And Phyllis, how about you? Well, I guess we sort of left the story in the middle there. Your co-worker in the kitchen told you that he was a Baha'i, and then what happened after that?
I went to Firesides for about 3 months, and that was about as long as it took me to decide that this was what I had been looking for all of my long 18-year life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I became a Baha'i at that point, and was a part of the Baha'i College Club down there. Well, after Gene and I got married, and our daughter was born about a little over a year after we got married, and then a year after that, we went pioneering together to Germany.
Okay.
So our whole family went over, and our other 2 children were born over in Germany. So we left with 1 child and came back 5 years later with 3.
Mm-hmm. What part of Germany?
The name of the town is Fürth. It's outside of Nuremberg.
Okay. So when you were in Germany, in addition to being involved in the Baha'i community, what did you do for livelihood and that kind of thing?
I worked at a German company. I had already begun a career in graphic arts.
Mm-hmm.
So I found a place that hired me.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a tricky thing. You have to have a work permit and a residence permit. But sometimes you go to one office and they say, well, you can't get a work permit because you don't have a residence permit, and you kind of run back and forth between the offices. But everything got squared away, and I had a job. Mm-hmm. And I really learned a lot from the German way of doing things. They're very thorough about producing everything, even their graphic art. So it was a great learning experience. And then, although I had a couple of years of German in college, it was very elementary. It was very difficult for me to really express complex thoughts. And so I studied every night when I went home. I studied German. And then there was a colleague there he enjoyed languages. And so he helped me with his with my German. I would practice the conjunctive or something, and he would say, "Sehr gut, Herr Unterschuetz," you know. So, not always.
I guess you had rudimentary German when you started working, but it must have been a challenge.
It was challenging. I mean, there were numerous situations, and I mean, they had a silkscreen factory, you know, so I worked my first 6 months there in the silkscreen factory. Yeah. And there were a lot of things that you had to do just as an employee. And sometimes you didn't do things right, and you wanted to say, well, if I had known that, I would have done that. And all I could say is, well, I didn't know that. I know it now, and I will know it next time.
Right. And Phyllis, how about you? Was your German up to par when you got there?
My German was non-existent when I got there. We had actually originally thought we would go to Switzerland because I spoke French and he spoke some German, and we thought, okay, Switzerland is the best choice. But Switzerland did not want us. They didn't want any immigrants of any kind, especially Americans at the time. So we figured he's going to be the one working, so it's more important to go to a place where he can speak the language. And I had no German at all, and I had I remember I would take my 1-year-old daughter out, and I'd try to go shopping, and people would holler at me. I found out later on they just holler. It wasn't me. It was just their cultural way. But I would come back to the apartment and cry and think, what am I doing here? But I worked really hard, and I got Berlitz tapes, and I went to the Volkshochschule, which is like the community college. After, I think we'd been there about 6 months before I went there, and then I started learning the grammar and stuff. But it was difficult. I remember when our second daughter was born, who lives here in Northampton, at least for the next few days. And I was in the hospital when she was born, and my German was just not very good at that time at all. And these nurses would talk to me, and I didn't understand them, and I would say, what, and they would say it louder, as if that would help me understand it. So it was all a little bit intimidating until I got to the point where I could speak it fluently. And I did eventually got a job for the Army on the weekends. I would go with the Army wives, or the spouses and families of the people that were stationed over there, because there was a large military presence in Nuremberg. And they would take these bus trips to different parts of Germany, and usually the bus driver only spoke German. And so I would go along as an interpreter, and I would get a free trip. And I don't think they paid me very much, but they paid me something, and it was a lot of fun, and I got to practice the interpreting,
Yeah, your German has to be pretty good if you start interpreting.
Yeah, now it's good. I wish it had been good before I went. I would have saved myself a lot of grief, I think.
Right. So you were there for 5 years. Mm-hmm. What were the circumstances that had you leave Germany?
I think our oldest daughter was ready to start school, and I know I had my misgivings about starting her in school there because the school system there is just incredibly strict. It seemed to me overly strict for a 5-year-old child. I saw these 5- and 6-year-old kids walking home from school with these backpacks loaded down with books to do their homework, and I thought, I don't know if I really want to do that to my kids. So I think we were ready to come back after 5 years and just kind of take our life up again here in the States.
Where did you guys settle in?
When we came back from Germany,
yeah.
We moved to Huntley, Illinois, which is a far northwest suburb. Lived there while our kids were young for about 9 or 10 years, I guess, and then we moved to Crystal Lake after that, which is also right in that area, both about 45 miles northwest of Chicago.
And Gene, you were able to find work when you got back to the United States?
Yeah, I found work pretty quickly. They were impressed with the skills I had acquired in Germany. So that was good. The most important thing for us as Baha'i parents was to get our kids together with other Baha'i kids.
And why was that?
It's the thing is that at home, in the household, we're raising our children with a certain value system, and a lot of those values, or maybe all those values, come from the texts of the Bahá'í Faith. For instance, one of the teachings is no backbiting. So we felt it was necessary for our kids to be with other kids that were receiving the same home training and sharing the same value system. I mean, I felt that way as an adult in various employment situations and so forth, where I felt, kind of lonely, kind of alone, because I didn't share the exact same value system as others. I mean, when you're in a work situation, you're almost in any situation, backbiting kind of takes place, and nobody even questions it. Right. Sometimes somebody might shut up if they see the person they're backbiting, but come around the corner or something. But basically, people don't really understand how devastating backbiting is, and we understand it as Baha'is only through attempting to eliminate that, because many of us, like me, come from another value system where backbiting is just accepted, and now all of a sudden we have to strive to eliminate backbiting from our behavior, and then it becomes apparent how difficult that is, and we start to appreciate the value of it, and over time, I think we see the benefits of that, because, of course, we're hoping people aren't backbiting about us, and when we find out that people aren't backbiting about us, we realize how valuable that particular teaching is. And also, there are times when backbiting does become a problem, and you can see how harmed people become, how it can just really inflict real pain on individuals and even groups of individuals. I mean, stereotyping is kind of like one huge form of backbiting.
Just thinking about that time, those years when my kids were growing up, and I mean, they're adults now, all three of them, and I look at the kind of people they have become. I know that I was not a perfect parent, and so I can't say, well, look, they've become such marvelous people because I did such a good job parenting them, They had other factors influencing their life, and the Baha'i teachings have been the main factor influencing all three of their lives. I think one of the things we talked about a lot when they were growing up was the whole concept of spiritual testing. And when I look at all three of them today, I realize that they understand this process way better than I ever did. This understanding that like when you're exercising a muscle, if you want the muscle to develop and grow, you have to work it, and it's sometimes painful. And if you don't work it, it stays weak. Spiritual attributes are like muscles in that way, and that if you want to grow spiritually and develop attributes, you're going to have to face tests and difficulties, and that makes you stronger. And if you don't face that you those muscles atrophy and you become weak. And I think that was a dynamic that was a part of our awareness as a family when our kids were growing up. It must have been, or they wouldn't understand it so well now. And I think that's a really powerful thing. That's something I'm grateful for.
So after the kids grew up, what was sort of the next phase in your life?
Well, in mine, when our youngest one started junior high, I decided to go back to work. I had worked before I was married, but hadn't worked. I'd done some part-time work with my dad's business. I actually trained as a hearing aid specialist and learned how to sell hearing aids because that's what my dad was doing. So I could do that part-time when the kids were in school, but salesmanship was not my forte. I felt so sorry for all these people with the hearing loss and no money to buy the hearing aids. So I decided to go back to work, and because I spoke German, I applied for a job in the U.S. branch of a German company, who hired me simply because I spoke German. I knew nothing about importing and exporting, which is what I ended up doing. It was kind of on-the-job, sink-or-swim sort of training.
And you didn't lose any of your German over the 20 years?
No, I don't think so. I don't know how I managed not to. I guess I just took... I don't know how I managed not to lose my German, but I didn't. The problem I did have, though, was that I had learned German not in school so much, but I had learned it in Germany. And so I learned it with a South Bavarian accent. So when I got into this company, that was the parent company was in Stuttgart, they had a whole different accent. I mean, a completely different dialect. And the first day I got on the phone with them, because my boss said, we hired you because tomorrow you can pick up the phone and speak German, and that's what we want. We'll teach you the rest. And I picked up the phone and started talking to these people. I thought, oh no, I'm in trouble. But I picked it up pretty soon. I was speaking with a Stuttgart accent myself. So I worked at that company for, I guess, about 8 years. And it was a very interesting experience. It was a good experience in the sense that I learned a lot of skills. I worked internationally all the time. I worked with customs and with international shipping. It was a very challenging job, and I really loved it. It was also a company that was very male-dominated, and sexism was kind of written right into their code of ethics, I think. And so it was challenging in that respect.
Yeah.
But I did really learn a lot there.
And I guess, Gene, you kept on working as the...
Yeah. At one point, I decided to... I had this idea that I wanted to get into education, so I entered into a master's course for art education. And after about 3 semesters, got a little bit discouraged because other than the severe cut in pay, I would not be able to practice the nifty things I was learning in school because we were studying this fantastic theory about art. I was pretty sad about that because it would have been nice to kind of plug into a school system and really have hands-on experience and watch kids develop with this new approach to art.
Right.
So I switched over to studio art and got my master's in that. So that's one of the things I did. Then another thing that was more directly work-related, when computers kind of finally made it into mainstream around the middle 80s, 86, something like that, I asked to be sent to school to get trained on computers and eventually learned how to do graphics on computers instead of on a drawing board. So that was pretty neat. So I'm one of the older folks that actually feels comfortable with computers.
And then what was the next phase in your life?
Well, we went to a Baha'i conference. It was called the Green Lake Conference. It was in Wisconsin, and this was in 1996 in the fall. And at the time we went, all 3 of our children were leaving home. So here we were rattling around in this big house, and we were just kind of continuing our ordinary lives. And we went to this conference in '96, and one of the speakers there, the theme of the conference was "So Great an Honor." And all of the talks and the sessions were about considering how important this time was in our lives, what a special time it was, and how crucial it was for us to do something out of the ordinary during this time in our lives. Do something different. Seize your chance. This was kind of what all of the talks were about. And so not long before that, I think Gene had started freelancing. He was doing freelance work at home. I was kind of getting somewhat fed up with the job I was in, kind of irritated with some of the attitudes and looking for a change.
Right.
And so we left the main session of this one conference, and we got into our car. We were driving back to our tent, and for some reason that neither one of us understands, we looked at each other and we said, let's sell our house and buy a travel trailer and go travel teaching the Bahá'í Faith around the country. It was a crazy idea when you think about it.
Yeah, and you both were like in sync with this at the same moment in time?
We were, and that's what was strange, because I am a very sequential sort of a step-by-step thinker. I arrive at things in a very step-by-step, linear sort of a way. And Gene is very much a holistic thinker, and he takes wild lateral leaps to the side, and we never come up with the same thing at the same time. We may eventually, but we get there very differently. And so the fact that we both came up with this idea in the car is kind of odd, really. And so we took a year. That was in September of '96. And so we took a year to get our affairs in order, to sell our house. I quit my job and get our, whatever medical care we needed to get done or anything like that. And then in September of '97, we sold our house, put our house on the market, and we bought this little bitty 22-foot long travel trailer and a van to pull it with. And we left, thinking that we were going to be gone for maybe 6 months. I think
that was your initial
I think so. We thought
concept.
6 months to a year, or 6 months, and then maybe when we're tired of it, we'll get a smaller house because the kids are gone, or I don't know what we thought we were going to do after that. We were just going to take off in gypsy-like fashion, and our goal was to travel around and to visit various Baha'i communities around the country, kind of get a feel for the stage of development that the different communities were in, and offer ourselves to be of service in whatever way they wanted. We would give public talks or speak at firesides about whatever topic they wanted us to speak on. We were very free-floating about the whole thing.
So, Gene, what's the first place you headed for when you left home?
One day, Phyllis typed out 4 letters to each of the regional committees that were in existence at the time, telling them about our desire to be of service and to be mobile. And so she instructed me to drop those in the mailbox. So at the end of the day, she asked me, "Did you mail those letters?" I said, "Yep." I took them to the mailbox. They're all winging their way, into the 4 corners of the United States.
We were just going to send the one to the western region.
Just yeah.
Oh, I see.
We really wanted to go west, and we were really excited about visiting that part of the United States. West was just a real calling, and so. But what happened is all 4 letters got sent out, and she was dismayed. We didn't know which one was going to land first. A couple later, we got a call from one of the members of the Eastern Council, and she said, "Got your letter? We're ready to have you come out this way." And so we said feebly, "Well, but we want to go west." And she said, she asked rather, "Did anybody else respond to your letters? Has anybody else invited you to their region?" And we said, "Well, no." We had to be honest. She said, "Okay, well, I'm expecting you to come out here." So we did. So it was a mad rush. There was some time where we had to get our trailer, learn how to pull it, which was pretty traumatic, and outfit it with dishes and stuff that we needed. And then we pulled out one evening at 10 o'clock at night because we were already a day late in our scheduling. And we said, we can't wait another day. We can't wait till we can't get a good night's sleep and pull out at 11 o'clock tomorrow. That's just not going to work. It's got to be 10 o'clock at night. So we pulled out and we headed eastward, and I think our first destination was Buffalo, New York.
Oh, okay. And what time of year were we talking?
This was in autumn, September.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you were heading for New England just about wintertime.
We were. We didn't quite realize yet. Now we know more about when you should be where in a trailer. And but we did see some spectacular scenery and some beautiful foliage as we went through New York.
For sure.
And I think we were, by the time it really got cold, we were already down into Washington, D.C. area.
Okay.
So we didn't have too many troubles with the cold that year.
Sounds like you got stories of other years.
We do have stories of other years, yeah. It took us a while to learn.
Yeah.
I think New England, what was important in New England, I guess I want to say at this point is that the probably the most important philosophy that directs my life as a Baha'i is that God is in control of everything that happens. We have free will, and I don't know how those two work together, but I believe that God is in control. And I love that. That makes me feel safe and happy. I'm glad I'm not the one. And so there are so many things that have happened to us, and particularly since we've been on the road. When you're in motion, there's more opportunity for these things to happen, where we think we know what we're doing and what's going to happen, and it turns out to be something completely different. And so I say that as a preface to say that when we were in New England, we were giving talks in these different communities about, well, we were talking about gender equality, which is one of the principles of the Bahá'í Faith. But if you'll remember previously, I talked to you about this dynamic of testing. And as soon as you pretend you know something, normally you get hit with a test. And so we learned fairly early on not to say that we were experts on gender equality, because a 22-foot trailer is a very small place to realize you still have to work on that. So we quit talking about that fairly early on, I think. But what we did do in New England was we started going into communities and meeting African American Baha'is. And I now refer to it as the taxi driver / bartender / hairdresser syndrome. People would talk to us in a way that they would not talk to people that lived in their communities. I think because we were itinerant, we were just moving through, and so we had this anonymity and this safety like a taxi driver does. And so people kind of opened up to us about some of the struggles that they were having. And my experience with race was, I had the experience of this man that taught me the Baha'i Faith, who was the man that I was engaged to and ended up not marrying. But I'd had, the experience of being with him and learning something about how racism functions in the United States. But it was fairly limited, and our Baha'i beliefs are that racial prejudice must be eliminated, and that racial unity is at the basis of any kind of peace and prosperity for this world, So we have had this belief in the oneness of humanity and the elimination of prejudice all of our Baha'i lives. However, we had no practical hands-on experience with what that looks like. And so as we traveled around in New England and met more and more African American Baha'is and heard about their daily struggles, how they deal with the racism that impacts them, we realized that this was a very important topic for Baha'i communities to be talking about. And so we began, as we continued throughout New England, to bring this topic up. We were in New London, Connecticut, which was a community where all of the Baha'is were African American at that particular time. And we were just taken in, embraced by these friends that treated us like family and shared with us some very passionate stories about their lives. And that whole process began to hone us and focus us. And we started to feel like the race unity work was what we were being called to do. And from New England, we went south, and it turned out that really that was the case. That was exactly what we were being prepared to do. And the longer we do this work, the more we can see how our whole lives have kind of led us up to the point where we were ready to do this and called to do it. And there's kind of a funny story about what happened when we left New England. It was starting to get chilly, and we looked. I have this book called Full Timing in Your RV, And I remembered that there was a chapter that said RVing in the cold weather or something like that. And so I pulled the book out and I opened it up to that chapter. And the first sentence says, "Your RV was not designed for use in cold weather." And so I realized we had to get south. And I said, well, we've never been to Florida. Let's go to Florida. Mm-hmm. And so I called this woman who was on the regional committee of the southern states, and she was in Florida. And I said, I think we'd like to come down there and be of service. She said, we have much work for you to do down here. So I got out my map and I looked and I saw Interstate I-95, and it went from where we were to Florida. And I said, well, look at that. It goes right through South Carolina and right past the Louis Gregory Baha'i Institute, which was a place we'd always heard of and wanted to visit.
And what is it, by the way?
It's a permanent Baha'i school, and it's where Baha'i courses are taught, and it's also a center of service to the wider community. And it's named after Louis Gregory, who was an African-American Baha'i man. He was, during the 1920s and 30s and 40s, he traveled around in the South at a time when segregation and the Jim Crow laws made life very dangerous for him. And he taught the oneness of humanity during that time. So he's quite a hero to most Baha'is. And this institute was named after him, and we had a desire to go there. So I told this lady in Florida, we're going to stop in South Carolina for a day or two on our way down. And she gave me a phone number. I called a woman that lived near the Louis Gregory Baha'i Institute, called her up, and I said, hi, you don't know me, but my name's Phyllis, and my husband Gene and I are travel teaching, and we'd like to stop in your area for a day or two and be of service if we could be. And I said, oh, and by the way, my husband's a graphic designer. And this woman got so excited, I thought she was going to faint. She just kept saying this prayer. She kept saying, thank you, God, and going on and on. I thought, what the heck is going on with this lady? And she finally told me that in a town down there in South Carolina, it was a town where they had about 60% of the population, is that right? About 60% is African American and 40% white. A town where previously, like most towns in the South, the political control had been in the hands of white citizens, and then very recently that had all turned around, and they had elected an all-black city council and a black mayor and fire chief and all this, and the town was kind of up for grabs, and the white citizens were afraid, and it was all very nerve-wracking, I think, for a lot of folks. And so the mayor had he had contacted the local Baha'is because he knew Baha'is did race unity work, and they had together come up with this plan to proclaim 9 weeks for racial unity in this town, and they were going to have a series of workshops on creating unity. And the Baha'is had agreed to provide facilitators for these workshops, but they had only somebody to do the first one. They didn't have anybody to do the other 8, but they had agreed on faith, I guess, and then had spent the next week trying to find somebody to do the rest of them, to no avail. And the night before I called, they'd had an all-night prayer session, beseeching God to send them some travel teachers, and if it wouldn't be too much trouble, somebody that could do graphic design to help with all of their posters and advertising and things. So that's why when I called her, she was so excited. And what was supposed to be a 2-day visit turned into a 2.5-month visit.
Oh, really?
2.5 months. We never did get to Florida. We ended up doing facilitating the entire remaining sessions of the
9
workshops.
weeks.
Yes, and it just changed us completely.
What was so special about that time? I think it was very formative for both of us. Just speaking for myself, I felt embraced by people from whom I had been virtually separated my whole life. We had wonderful conversations as we were putting up our flyers and store windows and so forth. We got to know the people that were the participants in the workshops, who then invited us to their homes for dinner, invited us to their churches to worship, took time with us to sort of educate us about how it was for them living down there, So that was very formative, and we heard many, many stories. People shared many stories. And then when we left and we traveled around in other places in the States, we heard the same stories, just from different people in different places. So for us, the whole picture of the racial climate, so to speak, was a matter of connecting the dots. It's not. What we learned, I guess, is that racism isn't just something that happens in one little area or in one part of the city. It's pretty widespread. As I mentioned, as we traveled, people shared stories with us. And it's not the reason we were. Let me say, what happened is when we entered South Carolina. I think I was driving. I looked over and I said to Phyllis, "Did you feel that?" We had just come out of North Carolina, across the border into South Carolina, and I felt something. I don't know what it is. I could guess, I could speculate, but it was definitely something. I looked over at Phyllis. I said, "Did you feel that?" She said, "Yeah." And we've been wondering what that was. I have a feeling it has something to do with the spirit of that particular state, with the history. I don't know. I wouldn't even want to start really trying to break it down and limit it. But it was definitely something, and from that moment on, like I said, through the generous efforts that people made with us, taking us into their homes and churches and so forth, and then elsewhere where people did the same things, we felt something different with each encounter with somebody. I personally felt like something in me was being recognized and validated as never before, like among my previous peers, who were all white. So that was really important to me, because then I started seeing it myself. And that changed the way I related to people. But there was an energy that we both felt in these interactions with people, the people that we had been separated from. And we kind of became hungry for that energy. We kind of referred to it as the magic or something like that. And so as we traveled and made presentations to groups along the way, we shared these stories. And also we shared stories about ourselves, how we had changed and why we had changed and what we had learned and how we were different. And people were telling us that was the most important, the personal stories were the most important part of our presentations. And then at some point somebody encouraged us to write a book, and so that's our current effort at the moment.
And what is the title of the book?
Well, the working title, it's not the final official title yet, because we are not at that point yet with a publisher. But the working title is Longing: Stories of Racial Healing. And the reason we chose the word longing, well, actually, the reason we chose it is because it came from a rap that I had.
Oh, really?
One day we were in Atlanta, and we both made up. We were with a friend who does raps, and her children were rapping, her teenage children, and their friends were having a rap battle in the living room, and we got inspired. So we created our own raps, which is a little amusing. But anyhow, there was an expression of longing in one of them, and that was, I think, where we took the book title from. And I was thinking about one of the things I didn't mention. When our kids were still teenagers, we went to a conference in Chicago, and it was called the Vanguard of the Dawning. That was the title of the conference, Vanguard of the Dawning. And it was a conference that was organized by African American Baha'is for the specific purpose of looking at their role as people of color in the Baha'i Faith, what their role was, what their history was, how they wanted to use their particular experience as black Baha'is in service to the faith. And they said the conference was open to everybody, and we believed them, so we went. It was a very moving experience. And at one point during this conference, I had kind of I hate to say an epiphany, that's such an overused word, but it was kind of one of these realizations that hits you on the head like a baby grand piano, And what it was I thought about a movie that I had seen a long time before about a girl that had been adopted when she was born, and her parents never told her that she was adopted until she became 21 years old or something like that. And then they said, yes, you're adopted, we're not your real parents, and you do have brothers and sisters out there somewhere. And this girl then became obsessed with finding her family, her parents and her biological siblings. And I remember sitting at this Vanguard of the Dawning conference and thinking, that's what happened to me. We were separated at birth. We were separated from our brothers and sisters because we were white and they were black, and the society conspires to keep us apart. And this is my family, and I don't even know them. And how can I even know who I am if I don't know my brothers and sisters? And it kind of became this longing to find my family and to reconnect with my family. And that is a theme that has stayed with me. Sometimes people say, what drives you? What drives you to do this work? Don't you get tired of it, or things like that? And I say, the thing that drives me is the images of these people that I love that resides in my heart. Their faces reside in my heart. I carry them with me. That's what drives me.
Right.
The desire to do anything I can do to make this world we live in a place that's more bearable for them and friendlier to them. That's what this journey. I mean, it's been 9 years now that we've been on the road. For most of that time, or for a good part of that time, we were doing race unity workshops. We developed a format, and we were presenting workshops for different community organizations or for the Baha'i communities. We did a few at some universities and things. But the whole time we were doing that, it was these personal relationships that was the main, the main motivating force behind what we were doing. The Baha'i teachings say that we are one human family, and that's a concept. But when you start having these loving relationships with people, it becomes more than a concept. It becomes your concrete reality. And suddenly you want to do whatever you can to make this oneness a reality on all levels. And so this is how we started writing the book. And we left off with the workshops and started focusing on these stories about how we had changed as a result of connecting with folks, mostly African American friends. We've formed some friendships with people that were Native American from different tribes around the country, and Latino friends and so forth. Our book focuses mainly, though, on this issue of black and white.
Now, have you really been on the road for 9 years? You've been in your 22-foot
no, actually,
RV, or have you upgraded since then?
We upgraded. We were on the verge of killing each other. 20. I mean, you just don't know until you've stepped into an area that is 22 feet by 8 feet, and imagine living in it with another person for 2.5 years. Then you know.
The so-called work is really an effort to build consciousness or enhance consciousness about this process that we perceive happening in this country and indeed worldwide. Is what Baha'u'llah talks about when he says the earth is one country and mankind its citizens. So we see this, particularly in the States, we see this coming together. We see representatives from every group of the human family here, and it presents the issue, the challenge of somehow making that work. And so in Baha'i communities in particular, you see folks that are attracted to the message of Baha'u'llah coming together in meetings and in social situations with very different cultural patterns and facing these challenges head on is very interesting to observe. And so we're not trying to rescue any particular group of the human family. We're trying to understand what our role is. And for us particularly, we're trying to understand what our contribution as white citizens or European American citizens is to this process that's taking place, this coming together, and how do we fit in to this process? What is the contribution that we make?
Now, what do us folks who are in one residence in one town sort of take for granted that folks who are like you all, who don't have a single residence address, have to deal with that maybe we could appreciate?
You take for granted the fact that you can have an HMO with a primary care physician, and they're always there in the town you live in. You take for granted the fact that you have a refrigerator that's made out of metal, so that when people give you magnets, you have somewhere to put them. You take for granted that you actually have wall space, so if somebody gives you a framed quotation, you have somewhere to hang it. that you have a basement to put extra stuff that you don't need at the moment.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things you take for granted that you don't realize when you first get into a trailer how much you're going to miss them. Or that you can go into the bedroom and close the door and be by yourself, you know.
Yeah.
Those are some of the things that I miss.
Yeah.
I've recently started doing art, and I make a painting.
Oh, really?
I make a painting, and then I walk around the trailer with it thinking, okay, which window am I going to tape it on? Because or tape it on our mirror. That's about my only options.
What about you, Gene?
Well, there are some advantages, too.
Okay. Yeah.
Fewer things to mess with. No grass cutting. Don't have to sweat siding and roofs and stuff like that. Of course, there are other things, like because road vibration loosens things, there are things that need fixing from time to time, you know, and that's kind of frustrating. Right. It doesn't happen in your house unless you live in an earthquake zone, basically.
When you live in a house, you don't have to empty your wastewater tank every week either.
Back to the book for a second. When do you think your book might come out?
My hope is that it'll be within a year.
Oh, great.
But I don't know that that'll happen. But that's what I'd like to see happen. Before we forget everything, you know.
Now, what does the future hold for you two?
We actually have some real plans.
Oh, good. Okay.
Or some desires. One of the things that I'm working on is harking back to that 3 semesters I spent studying art education, where I learned a little bit. I got acquainted with the idea of art and belief systems, the nature of the art process being unique in that in the process of producing art, the student or the artist is making value choices at every step of the way. And so this learning of how to make value choices and this cognizant of making value choices can be transferred laterally to other areas of life. So I'm investigating that. I'm reading books. I'm getting together with other Baha'i artists, and hopefully we can put something together that we can put out there as a service to the community and beyond the Baha'i community too, to anybody who wants to use it.
Very interesting.
So that's one of the things I'm involved in, and in addition to discovering that I can write, I have other things that I'd like to write about.
What about you, Phyllis?
Well, I've recently discovered art, and which has been kind of interesting because my sister is an artist, and of course my husband Gene is an artist, and I've always been interested in writing, and I've always been a singer, but I never thought of myself as a drawer or a painter, and just recently discovered that I wanted to start drawing and painting, and took a few lessons and got some books. So I'm just in the very beginning stages, but I'm very excited about learning how to express some spiritual concepts in my art. That's my desire. And beyond that, we want to continue to be of service to the Baha'i communities, and we continue to travel. That much we know. People keep asking, well, when are you going to settle down? And our answer is, why should we settle down? And so I think at this point, that's not in our near future.
Well, I wish the best of luck to both of you, and hopefully I'll run into you traveling somewhere in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I asked Phyllis if she would sing for us and to give us a little background on the song.
Okay, I'll sing a prayer. It's a prayer I've always liked, but it's taken on more meaning to me recently because I sang it at the funeral of a friend of mine that died almost a year ago out in the San Diego area. He was a person who lived his life as a hollow reed. His goal was to empty himself as much as possible of himself so that he could be a channel for the love of God. And he walked through his life like that, and he was a great inspiration to me. So I miss him quite a bit, and I sang this song at his funeral. So his name is Aidan Maxwell, and I'll dedicate this song to him.
Very good.
Oh God, make me a hollow reed, from which the pith of self hath been blown, that I may become to others. O God, make me a hollow reed, from which the pith of self hath been blown, that I may become a clear channel, through which thy love may flow to others.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Jean and Phyllis Unterschuetz, a Baha'i couple who have been on the road for nearly 10 years promoting the principles of the Baha'i Faith. For a copy of this and other interviews, you're welcome to go to the website www.abahaiperspective.com. For information specifically on the Baha'i Faith, you can go to the website www.baha'i.org, or you can call the toll-free number 1-800-22-UNITE.